At dawn, the city breathed cold and pale, and Jack walked the alley behind the bakery with his dog Bruno. Jack was 42, thin, and always watching the ground for bottles or lost coins. The dog's tail swung like a metronome of hope. They were hungry again, yet they joked in whispers, the way lonely friends do. A lid clanged somewhere. Bruno froze, nose lifted, ears high. Jack followed the gaze toward a stack of boxes near a dumpster, where something wicker peeked through a torn tarp and seemed to shiver, although the morning was windless and still today. Jack tugged the tarp aside and found a basket, old yet sturdy, lined with fine cloth the color of cream. Inside lay a tiny baby swaddled tight, hands like seashells, eyes closed against the air. A note rested near the cheek, damp with fog. For a second Jack looked around to see whether a frantic parent would appear. No one came. Bruno whined softly, pressing close. Jack touched the little chest and felt a quick, determined heartbeat, as strong as stubborn fire. He whispered, "I hear you, little one," and gathered the basket gently into his shaking arms for warmth. Before we continue, please subscribe to my channel and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It would mean a lot to me. The note was brief, written in elegant ink that did not match this alley. It said only, "Forgive me. Keep him safe. Someone will come." Jack read it twice, then folded the paper as if it could still feel pain. He knew nothing of bottles, schedules, or medicine. He knew blankets, cardboard, and waiting. Bruno sniffed the basket and wagged his thin tail firmly, as though voting yes. Jack sighed and nodded. They would try. He tucked the note in his pocket like a promise and carried the child toward the river where the sun touched benches with warmth today. Morning traffic grew louder, but the bench near the water stayed kind. Jack sat with the basket on his lap and Bruno curled at his feet, guarding like a small, brave soldier. A woman passing by paused, frowned, and moved on. A man stared and shook his head. Jack wrapped his scarf around the baby's belly and listened to breathing settle. He whispered stories about trains he once built and oak floors that creaked like boats. The baby slept. For the first time in months, Jack did not feel useless. He felt chosen, and the feeling frightened him very deeply. He counted coins, not enough for formula, maybe enough for milk. He walked to the grocery, basket hidden under his coat, Bruno clothes. The clerk looked through him like glass. Jack bought milk, a tiny bottle, and a pack of diapers, paid with shaking hands. Outside, he warmed the milk at the coffee stand and asked the barista for a paper cup of hot water, which she gave without questions. He improvised a bath inside the cup and cooled the bottle against his wrist. The baby latched and drank greedily. Relief sweetened the cold air like spring returning at last. That night, they slept under the bridge near the mural of blue herons. Jack spread his coat, then laid the basket between himself and Bruno, so body heat made a small shelter. Trains moaned, rain began, and stopped. Jack stayed awake, counting breaths, the way parents do when they learn how fragile a life can be. He thought of his father, a stern man who fixed clocks and neglected time with his children. Jack promised to do better, even for one night. The baby stirred and sighed, and Bruno lifted his head, then slept again, satisfied with guard duty nearby. Morning returned with gulls, and so did hunger. Jack went to the shelter early, but rules were rules. No baby, no entry. He did not argue. He thanked the volunteer and walked away before shame could grow teeth. In the park, he met an old veteran named Riley who traded a blanket for a story. Jack told part of the truth. Riley nodded and pressed $3 into Jack's palm. "Buy fruit," he said gruffly. "Babies need sweetness." Jack bought bananas and mashed pieces with the side of his spoon, feeling like a scientist building answers from nothing each day. By afternoon, a missing child alert flickered across a television in a storefront window. The photo was small but clear. The same tiny mouth, the same swirl of hair. Jack stopped, clutching the basket strap. Sophia Hart, the caption read, daughter of industrialist Peter Hart. Authorities request information. Jack stared at his reflection, overlaid with the child's face. Two strangers bound by luck. Fear prickled. Would they take the baby and forget him? He remembered the note. Keep him safe. Someone will come. He decided to wait until dusk and then walk to the precinct with steady courage for answers. At dusk, rain began again. Jack wrapped the basket in the veteran's blanket and set out. Bruno trotted at heel, alert as a river fox. The precinct glowed like a ship in fog. At the desk, an officer lifted his eyebrows at Jack's clothes and said, "Sir, can I help you?" Jack swallowed, then said, "I think I found somebody important." They took him to a room with coffee, forms, and kindly questions. A nurse checked the baby while Bruno watched her every move. The baby yawned, milk drunk. Jack's shoulders ached suddenly with relief and exhaustion that cold evening. Within an hour, suited men arrived, with tired eyes and guarded voices. One carried a photograph that matched the baby perfectly. Another carried gratitude that he kept folding away like laundry. Jack answered questions carefully, produced the damp note, and showed the receipt for milk and diapers as though it were proof of love. Bruno accepted a bowl of water and slept under the chair. Finally, a woman with a calm voice said, "Mr. Hart is on his way. He asks you to stay." Jack nodded, though his legs wanted to run. Staying felt dangerous and strangely right for him. Peter Hart entered like a storm that had decided to become rain. He was younger than Jack expected, eyes raw from sleeplessness, suit forgotten. He went first to the baby, touched the tiny hand, and let his shoulders drop. The room softened. Then he turned to Jack, who rose without meaning to. Hart's voice was low. "You found my daughter." Jack nodded, unsure what to do with his hands. "Sir, she found me," he said, and the officer smiled. Hart looked at Bruno and bent to scratch his ears. "Thank you both," he whispered, as if prayer had answered today. They moved to a quieter office with chairs that did not wobble. Hart asked for the story from beginning to end, interrupting only to make sure Jack had eaten. Sandwiches arrived. Bruno received another bowl and a biscuit. Jack told the simple truth. The tarp, the basket, the milk, the long night. Hart listened without blinking, as if one wrong breath might blow the world away again. When Jack finished, the room felt full of relief. Hart said, "There will be questions and headlines. You do not have to face them alone." Jack stared, surprised to be included in them. The headlines came anyway, bright and hungry. Reporters waited beside patrol cars, microphones raised like spears. Hart shielded the baby, and officers formed a corridor. One question cut through. Is it true the rescuer is homeless? Jack felt heat climb his neck. Before he could speak, Hart answered, "True. And today, he is also a hero." The crowd shifted, respect replacing appetite. Jack blinked, then looked down at Bruno, who wagged as though applause were delicious. They stepped into night air, smelling of rain and cameras. For once, Jack did not shrink. He lifted his head and walked tall homeward. For 2 days, Jack stayed in a guest room at the Hart townhouse, because doctors wanted the baby nearby for checkups, and Hart refused to let Jack disappear. The room held a clean bed, a lamp with a warm shade, and silence that did not threaten. Jack bathed, while Bruno slept on a rug, as if he had always belonged there. Staff brought clothes that fit and food that did not come in wrappers. Jack felt awkward and grateful, like a man wearing borrowed weather. At night, he checked the basket by habit, even though a crib had replaced it. On the third morning, Hart invited Jack to his study, a room lined with books that smelled of cedar and ink. The businessman seemed less like a titan and more like a father learning humility fast. He said, "Our security failed. We will fix that, but we must also repair what fear did to you." Jack frowned, unsure. Hart continued, "You kept my child alive. Money cannot measure that, but it can open doors. Tell me what door you need." Jack stared at the window, at the garden, at Bruno asleep. He said softly, "A place that is ours forever." Hart did not hesitate. He handed Jack a folder with an address and keys. It was a small apartment above a hardware store 2 neighborhoods away, freshly painted, paid for a year. The lease bore Jack's name, not Hart's. A note paper-clipped to the keys read, "No strings, only thanks." Jack's throat closed. He had expected cash, perhaps, and a quick goodbye. Instead, he had been given responsibility and the dignity to carry it. Bruno barked once, delighted by the keys as if they were toys. Jack laughed, a sound he had forgotten his mouth was still able to make. They visited the apartment later. Sun fell kindly through a window above the sink. There was a bedroom with a door that closed and a closet for Bruno's blanket that he chose immediately. Jack stood in the center and felt a ceiling take weight off his shoulders. He set the basket on the table, though it was empty now, a symbol of how the day had turned. Hart checked the locks, then paused. "If you wish," he said, "I can arrange work at the store downstairs. The owner is a friend." Jack smiled. "I know tools. I can learn again." Weeks turned, steady as pages. Jack learned inventory, keys, invoices, and the rhythm of customers who wanted help more than prices. Bruno became the store's mascot, sleeping by the door and greeting everyone as if they were overdue friends. Sometimes, Hart visited with a baby, who reached for Jack's beard and laughed. Reporters tried again, then drifted away in search of louder miracles. Jack kept the first note framed above the table. "Forgive me. Keep him safe. Someone will come." It reminded him that the world breaks people, but it also sends others to hold the broken gently each day. On a quiet Sunday, Peter Hart asked Jack and Bruno to visit the house again. In the nursery, sunlight made slow rivers across the rug. Hart's wife, Elena, placed the baby in Jack's arms and said, "You are family now, whether you like it or not." Jack swallowed, stunned by the word. Family had once meant arguments and departures. Now it meant chairs pulled closer and a bowl on the floor for Bruno. Hart handed Jack a thin envelope. Inside were savings papers opened in Jack's name and a letter that promised partnership, not charity. Jack cried without apology there. That night, Jack returned to his apartment, placed the envelope beside the framed note, and sat quietly with Bruno. The city roared as always, but inside the room the air felt soft. He thought of the basket, the milk, the long cold bridge, and the moment a door opened between strangers, he whispered a promise to keep walking, like the man in the note asked. Tomorrow he would unlock the store, sweep the floor, and brew coffee for early customers who believed kindness costs nothing. Bruno sighed and slept. Jack turned off the light. and belonging stayed on for good. The morning sun warmed Jack's modest apartment. He sat at the edge of his new bed, staring at the deed that bore his name. For years he had owned nothing but rags and memories, and now a piece of paper declared him a man with a home. Bruno lay curled on the rug, tail flicking in sleep. Jack whispered, "We did it, boy." His heart raced as he remembered today he would meet the Harts formally, not as a rescuer in rags, but as a man they wished to thank. The thought filled him with fear and wonder. Outside, black sedans lined the curb. Elena Hart, elegant despite her exhaustion, hurried toward him. Tears glittered in her eyes as she clasped his hands. "You saved my daughter," she whispered. Jack lowered his gaze. "I only did what anyone should have done." Elena shook her head firmly. Most wouldn't have stopped. Bruno pressed against Jack's leg, sensing her gratitude. For the first time in years, Jack felt seen not as a burden, but as a man who mattered. Elena gestured toward the mansion's grand doors, urging him inside. His steps faltered, but Bruno trotted proudly ahead without hesitation. The mansion felt unreal. Marble floors gleamed beneath chandeliers, and art lined the walls. Jack hesitated with every step, worried he might scuff the polished stone. Bruno sniffed politely, tail wagging in controlled arcs, as though aware of the honor. In the nursery, the baby spotted Jack and reached tiny arms toward him. Elena smiled softly. "She remembers you." Jack bent down, lifting her carefully. The child giggled, pressing small fingers into his beard. Jack laughed too, a sound rusty from disuse. In that moment, surrounded by wealth he never dreamed of, he felt richer than he'd ever been. Later, in the study, Peter Hart joined them. His handshake was firm, his gratitude undeniable. "You gave us back our world," Peter said solemnly. Jack shifted uncomfortably. "I only kept her safe until she could come home." Peter studied him, then slid an envelope across the desk. Inside lay a deed to a modest house. Jack's throat tightened. "I can't accept this." Peter shook his head. "You already did the hardest part. Let this be our way of saying thank you." Bruno barked once, sharp and approving. Jack clutched the papers, overwhelmed, feeling the weight of dignity restored. News traveled quickly. Headlines read, "Homeless man saves millionaire's child." Reporters shouted questions whenever Jack stepped outside. He kept answers simple. "I didn't do this for attention. I did it because life is precious." Those words resonated beyond his control. Letters of thanks arrived. Strangers pressed food into his hands, and shelters asked him to speak. Fame felt strange, almost heavy, but Jack stayed grounded. He returned each night to his apartment, shared every meal with Bruno, and carried the memory of the alley where everything changed. He knew fortune could vanish quickly, but gratitude was worth holding tight. Adjusting to stability took time. Jack sometimes woke gasping, expecting cold pavement beneath him. Bruno nudged his hand, steady and reassuring, until calm returned. Slowly, Jack grew accustomed to warmth, hot showers that eased his bones, clean clothes, food that satisfied hunger instead of teasing it. Yet the greatest comfort came from visiting the Hart family. The baby squealed when she saw him, crawling eagerly toward Bruno. Elena often sat nearby, watching with tears. "You gave her a second chance," she told him once. Jack shook his head softly. "She gave me one too." For once, both statements were true. Over the months, Jack became part of their lives. He wasn't just the man who found their child, he was Uncle Jack. The little girl clapped whenever he entered, tugging his hand to play. Elena confided her worries during quiet evenings, and Peter asked Jack's opinion on charity projects. Jack marveled at the irony. Once forgotten by society, now trusted by those with power. Yet he never let pride take root. Worth isn't measured by wealth, he reminded himself. He had learned that lesson under bridges, when kindness was his only possession. That truth anchored him, no matter how life changed. At a charity gala, Elena introduced Jack to a hushed crowd. This man reminded us that heroes don't always wear suits. Sometimes they wear rags and carry loyalty in the form of a dog. Applause swelled, and Jack flushed. Bruno barked joyfully, tail thumping the stage. Jack cleared his throat. I didn't save her for recognition. I did it because kindness is the only thing we truly own. Without it, we're nothing. The hall fell silent, then erupted with applause. Jack stood awkwardly, but his heart swelled. For the first time, he realized his story had become a beacon for others. Despite his new life, Jack didn't forget the streets. He often returned to shelters, this time carrying food instead of waiting for it. Children played with Bruno, whose patience made him a favorite. Jack told his story quietly, encouraging others not to give up. Tomorrow can change everything, he said. Many nodded, clinging to his words. To them, Jack wasn't just a man who got lucky. He was proof that compassion could rewrite destiny. He didn't see himself as a savior. He saw himself as a man who once chose not to walk away. That choice had changed everything. Holidays brought Jack even closer to the Hart family. One Christmas, Elena insisted he sit at their lawn dining table. Nervously, Jack accepted. Laughter and light filled the room as the baby, now toddling, tried to feed Bruno scraps under the table. Jack raised a glass of cider and whispered, "Thanks not for riches, but for the basket, for Bruno's loyalty, for a second chance." In that moment, he understood that family wasn't just blood. It was those who stayed, who believed in your worth when the world didn't. And for the first time in decades, Jack felt truly at home again. Years passed, and the little girl grew. She called Jack uncle, spoiled Bruno with treats, and begged for his stories. Jack kept the note that once haunted him. "Forgive me. Keep him safe. Someone will come," framed in his living room. To him, it wasn't a wound anymore, but a reminder of fate's strange mercy. Visitors often asked about it. Jack would smile and say, "It's proof that even broken beginnings can lead to beautiful endings." Those words stayed with people long after they left. The note had once felt like a burden. Now, it was a symbol of hope. Even with comfort, Jack stayed humble. He worked part-time at a hardware store, enjoying honest labor. Bruno napped by the counter, beloved by customers. Jack never boasted of his connection to the Harts. Though people often recognized him, he preferred anonymity. Sometimes he returned to the old bridge, leaving food for others still wondering. He whispered, "Don't give up. Someone will come." He knew how fragile hope could be and guarded it fiercely. For Jack, kindness wasn't charity. It was survival. It had saved him in the alley that night, and now he passed it forward wherever he could. One summer evening, the Harts held a garden party. Jack arrived in simple clothes, Bruno beside him. The little girl, now older, ran straight into his arms. "Uncle Jack," she cried. Guests whispered, recognizing him from headlines long past. Elena approached, smiling. "You changed her life," she said. Jack shook his head gently. "She changed mine." Elena touched his arm, eyes warm. And that's why we trust you with our family." Beneath twinkling lights, laughter surrounding him, Jack realized belonging wasn't about where you came from. It was about who welcomed you when you arrived. That truth anchored him deeply. On quiet nights, Jack often sat by his window with Bruno resting nearby. He remembered the hunger, the cold, the invisibility of his past. Then he looked at the warm glow of his lamp, at the steady rise and fall of Bruno's chest, at the framed note on the wall. He whispered, "We made it, buddy." Bruno wagged his tail sleepily. Jack realized then that wealth wasn't the real reward. The true treasure was love, loyalty, and second chances. Those were things money could never buy, and no thief could steal. In that truth, Jack finally found peace. As years continued, Jack aged. His beard whitened, his back bent, but his spirit stayed strong. Bruno grew gray, yet his eyes sparkled with mischief. The little girl blossomed into a compassionate young woman. She often told others, "My life was saved, not by guards or fortune, but by a man the world forgot, and his dog." Each time Jack heard her say it, pride filled his heart. He hadn't just saved her life, he had shaped it. And in return, she gave him the family he never thought he'd have again. That was his greatest reward, greater than any fortune. One evening, she asked him softly, "What kept you going when you had nothing?" Jack stroked Bruno's fur, thinking. "Hope," he answered. "And this dog? Sometimes hope looks like a friend on four legs. Sometimes it sounds like a baby's cry in the night. You hold on, because maybe tomorrow will give you something worth living for." She hugged him, whispering, "You're my hero." Jack chuckled, shaking his head. Heroes are just ordinary people who decide not to walk away. It was the lesson he had carried for decades, the one he now passed on to her. Jack's story spread again, retold in classrooms and books. Teachers called it proof of resilience. Podcasters described it as a moral lesson. Jack never sought attention, but he accepted it, hoping it might inspire others. For him, victory wasn't fame. It was walking down the street without fear, knowing Bruno was fed, knowing he could close a door at night and sleep safe. A roof, a friend, and love, he once told a reporter. That's all anyone really needs. The world agreed. His simple words, born of hardship, carried more weight than the polished speeches of any politician. Toward the end of his life, Jack sat in the Hart family's garden. The young woman, no longer a child, rested beside him, running charities in his name. Bruno, old but loyal, lay at his feet. "You gave me a life," she said softly. Jack shook his head. "We gave each other one." He breathed in the scent of roses, listened to Bruno's slow breaths, and felt gratitude wash over him. His story had been long and painful, yet miraculous. From forgotten to unforgettable, from invisible to embraced, his journey had come full circle. He had found belonging at last. And when Jack finally closed his eyes one peaceful evening, Bruno nestled close. The Harts mourned deeply, but celebrated his legacy. His story became more than headlines. It became a parable whispered on cold nights, a reminder that miracles begin with small choices. People told their children, "A man once chose kindness when the world ignored him, and it changed everything." Jack's name lived on as a symbol of hope. In the end, he was remembered not as a homeless man, but as a man who gave love when it mattered most. That was the truest reward of all.